Hello, welcome to the show, everyone. I do believe this is our inaugural episode. So to explain the format, you have a question, send it in, and I answer the question. It's that simple. Today's question is, what's the deal with Beystadiums? Now, the Beystadium is, of course, the object you do battle in a Beyblade battle. Here we have the Summit Stadium made by Dan of the World Beyblade Organization. It's a recreation of the BB-10 attack-type Beystadium from Metal Fight Beyblade, the 10th release in that line. Oh no, we have a little crack there already. Well, it's only $20, so if this gets broken, it's a lot easier to replace than an actual BB-10, which, being over a decade old, is a bit expensive by now. So, this is essentially the gold standard of Beystadium design, and it's what the basis has been for essentially since the beginning of the series, at least on the Takara Tomy end of things. Hasbro stadiums look much different due to being made out of a single piece of vacuum plastic that has to have very high walls in order for the bays not to fly out and hit children. So this kind of design with just empty walls, empty spaces between the walls even, is not very kosher to that goal of not harming children. Now, do note that they did have cardboard dividers that came with every stadium that went around them to keep the bays in the play area, but the legal department, in popular legend, was too afraid that children wouldn't abide by that. And it's probably a good thing, but it is quite a shame because the Hasbro stadiums weren't quite as dynamic as this one. Now, the basic design is this radial symmetry, having 3 walls equidistant apart, and then 3 gaps in those walls that a bay can be knocked out of, like so. Also, a part of the design is this dish area that slopes down to the center, and a secondary ridge that has a slightly different angle to it, but overall just kind of slopes down and helps attack types maintain a flower pattern. While this is a replica of a Metal Fight Stadium, the Tornado type attack stadium, or the Tornado Stadium attack type, or Tornado Attack Stadium, from Bakuten Shoot Beyblade, the first iteration of the series, takes almost the same form, just different dimensions, maybe different shapes, and a different thickness of tornado ridge, but overall very much the same design. And this has been the core design of most Beystadiums in the series until we get to our most recent stadium, the Extreme Beystadium, which is quite a ways different. So let's explore what led us from this to this. So while this is the main format that Beystadiums have taken in years past, there's of course been other shapes to support other types of Beyblade, give boosts to stamina types, defense types, balance types, etc. Although those haven't really been popular in competitive since they kill the viability of attack types, and those are usually the type that needs the most boost in order for the game to stay fun and dynamic and have an equal amount of threat of things being knocked out of the stadium, stopping the game from becoming 2 tops spinning in the middle until one eventually dies, which is not very entertaining. And it's very easy to see how this evolved out of a standard Beygoma arena, which is usually a tarp or some other kind of fabric draped across a drum-like container that slopes down to the middle. So both of the tops come down to the middle and strike each other. They essentially just added walls and a little ridge to it and called it good. And quite honestly, it was good for a long time. Now, at some point, during the Metal Fight Saga. After 3 years, they thought to revamp the series a bit, almost like a new generation without starting a new generation, still under the Metal Fight brand, still fully compatible with other Metal Fight tops, almost like a heavy metal system, a subsystem within Bakuten Shoot Beyblade, except fully compatible with all of the products that came before it. Now, the gimmick there is that they also changed the stadium for this new sub-generation. This is the Zero-G Stadium Attack type. Oh, we've gotten a bit dirty in here. It's a bit of a departure from this, although if you look at it, it follows the same essential ideas. 3 equidistant walls with gaps for bays to fall out of. Except you'll notice that it rocks around. That's the Zero-G part of it. So the bays would race around and create these crazy patterns. It's not fully bowl-shaped. They do have a flat edge right here. But otherwise, it pretty much stays the same. It's a bowl shape, and it wobbles around and creates really exciting battles. Now, with the BB-10, you could essentially bay battle any bays that have been released up to that point in this. It's a very generic shape. But this is a bit of a different story. You definitely could, don't get me wrong, but it's highly dependent. Any bays that were low to the ground would start to scrape really easily. So I think that maybe heavy metal system bays would be good in this, and any bays that are somewhat tall. Although anything with a short blade base would probably just scrape. The larger burst bays, I do know for a fact, hate this stadium. They are just too big for it. And surprisingly, the Beyblade X bays are a joy in this stadium. They're tall enough to really zoom around here and use the gimmick without scraping, and they lead to some really fun battles. So it's a fun little gimmick, but one could attribute the fall to the Metal Saga to this. Honestly, if a Beyblade generation started with this, I don't think it would be an issue. It might seem random at first, but there's some real fun to be had here. I think it's just too much of a leap from what Metal Fight was into this for an already waning series, that when they tried to almost change everything about the series to this, it went the way of the heavy metal system. So, while I do think this kind of stadium is fun and has its use, it has a bit of historical issues with it. A little bit of a quagmire there. It has its haters, it has its lovers, but I think generally nowadays people are more interested in it, especially now that you can get it with New Boy. New Boy was a company that released products in Arabic for Beyblade, I believe in Middle Eastern areas. So their products do run a bit cheaper since they released later than Metal Fight usually did in other regions. And sometimes there's a bit of a quality issue with them, but I would rate them around the same as Midfix. But the stadiums, they seem on par. This just seems like a real Zero-G attack type stadium. I have no complaints here. Although it is really funny to see Arabic writing, Japanese writing, and English writing all on the same packaging. It's a sight to behold. So after a short hiatus, we came back with Burst. And the Burst-based stadium looks a bit different, but it is essentially just this attack-type stadium that we've had since the beginning. Except they called this what it was, the standard type. It's a bit of a misnomer to call this an attack-type stadium. While attack types do work on it, it pretty much puts everyone at a level playing field, and since it's been a competitive favorite because of that. This has the same three-walled structure with gaps for bays to fall out of, and is just that idea with a hood over it to stop, bursting parts from hitting children. They essentially built those cardboard enclosures into the stadium itself. It worked well for most of Burst's lifespan, but bays in Burst got much bigger by the end of it. So these pockets became a bit too small for bays to easily fly out of, and there was a lot of instances of bouncing back into the arena, which the WBBA and the WBO, the official and unofficial powers on Beyblade, ruled those differently, and there's been a lot of discussion about that. But it essentially followed the same idea. And like Metal Fight before it, they did eventually release another arena that became the standard. This is the Dynamite Battle Beystadium. It's quite a bit bigger, if you didn't notice, and it only has 2 pockets this time, which calls back to almost those large Hasbro stadiums that had 2 pockets on either end, and the high walls to keep the bays from flying out, and has a similar design flaw to it that attack types are kind of nerfed in this because it's tougher to knock things out. In exchange, they do offer you 2 points for knocking a Beyblade out as opposed to the 1. Matching how in Burst, if you burst the other Beyblade, you would also get 2 points in a match. So that's the first kind of thing we've seen with messing with the point structure with the arena itself. There's also an issue of this outer ridge right here, right outside of the first tornado ridge, is kind of flat, so bays just kind of stall on it. So if you just have a stamina type stall on that, or an attack type gets caught up there, they'll waste a lot of their power before they can actually, do their thing. The dish is at a much more dramatic angle, which I think was to help attack types, but I just don't think it did so enough. I think it's a good enough stadium, but to call it the standard type is a bit of a reach in my thoughts. But it's interesting to note how they messed with the point structure here, which eventually came back in the Extreme Stadium, the standard stadium for Beyblade X, the newest generation of Beyblade. They have a lot of things going on here that's not standard to normal Beystadiums in years past. They have gimmicks built into this, almost like the Zero-G Stadium. It's almost like a synthesis of the Zero-G and Dynamite Battle standard type stadium that they took 2 stadiums that didn't do too well or aren't looked fondly upon and combined them together. Although, to be fair, this stadium was also probably in development around the same time as the Dynamite Battle Stadium, so maybe it could have borrowed simultaneous development, but let's break down what's going on here. You have the burst-style hood, which the X-bays do burst, but this is really to keep those metal bays inside. I think safety regulations might have gotten stricter since Metal Fight Beyblade to allow just metal tops to go flying, especially with how sharp and how energetic the X-bays are. We have a classic kind of tornado ridge here, except it's incomplete, meaning that bays can get out from this area onto this green toothed part, which is called the extreme line. When a bay hits the extreme line, they have teeth on all of their bits, which are the tip that goes onto the stadium surface that the bay balances on and spins on and determines its movement. And once those gears engage, they'll race around the extreme line to do a very energetic attack called an extreme dash, and that is the main kind of gimmick, and that's why all of the stadium pockets are on one side of the stadium, another big departure from normal. We have the overfinish pockets, the over zones even, and the extreme zone. So if a bay gets hit into the over pockets, that's 2 points. If a bay gets burst, that's 2 points. And if a bay gets outspun, that's 1 point. So we're already kind of there with the scoring system on the Dynamite Battle Standard Stadium, which is interesting to know. Here, they mix things up even further by having the extreme pocket, though even though it looks like the largest pocket, because it is, due to just the math of the way the stadium works and the bays are wont to move here, it's actually more likely to get into the over pockets. So, in compensation for that, the extreme zone is worth 3 points, which highly weighs things towards an attack type strategy. So in years past, the way that they would have handled things was to just release a stadium that would benefit an attack type or nerf other types. But here, we're really looking at taking the game's scoring itself into account into what types you use, which is part of the whole generation's Gear Sports initiative to make Beyblade more like a sports and more like a competitive game. I think it's a really interesting thought experiment, and so far it's been really fun and more engaging than one would think. I don't think attack types are too powerful, and I think all of the bays they've released have like direct counters and good interactivity with each other that I don't think any one bay or type is given too much advantage. I would rather things weigh towards more attack type viability than more, say, stamina viability, because Beyblade is a game about two tops hitting each other, and I think a large part of what makes the game fun is having those tops do wickedly awesome clashes in the middle, which this stadium is built by design to do with that extreme dash. They literally said in their design interviews that this was meant to mimic the special attacks from the show, and I think that does a really, really good job of doing that. That's not to say that stamina types are completely down and out. They're still good. Defense types are finally back after a stint and burst where they weren't really too viable, since everything was heavy enough to not really be knocked around. Every stamina type combo was round enough and heavy enough to also be a defense type combo, essentially. But here, everything feels a lot more balanced. And there's a lot of skilled launching that you haven't seen in other stadiums that you can do with this to make use of the extreme line or to avoid it entirely. It's not just a simple matter of attack types shoot into a flower pattern anymore. There's a lot more thinking that goes into there. Not to say that there's not any thinking that goes into other generations, but now I feel like every type, due to the existence of the extreme line, has to change their game plan around that and shoot in ways that they might not have before. I think this is a really cool way to take maybe some of the failures of years past, if you could even call them that, like the Zero-G Stadium or the Dynamite Battle Stadium, and really tie them into a product that makes use of every part of Beyblade, that makes the game fun and memorable and encourages you to experiment with your launches, experiment with your combos, experiment in all totality. So it's interesting to see from all of years past that gets synthesized into this stadium. Because it's not just the bays, which were set out from the beginning to be a synthesis of all generations of Beyblade. The stadium itself, even though it looks like nothing we've seen before, kind of takes all of the previous generations of Beyblade and shoves them in here, whether that be the anime or actual gameplay. It's very, very fun to see that as a longtime fan of the franchise. I think that answers our question of what's the deal with Beystadiums. So, if you have a question that you'd like to ask, send it in, and maybe we'll answer it on the next episode. Thank you for joining us, and have a safe night.